Hello, OWASP Ottawa, and welcome to the end of summer. You knew it was coming, so here it is. Welcome to our September meetup, and I'm really excited about this one because there's some very current information that's very important. But before we do that, I just want to go through the usual stuff on our slide deck with respect to OWASP Ottawa. First of all, there are ways to connect to us. If you're on YouTube, then you already know the last one, but we're also on LinkedIn and we have our own Slack. You can always follow us on our Twitter handle at OWASP_Ottawa. Of course, OWASP itself has its own Slack, which you can connect to with their global OWASP Slack, but that means you actually should be a member. And so OWASP has a number of benefits associated with membership. And I'm not going to go through every one of them, but one of them is being able to be part of the Slack and the amazing communities within it. If you're in the Ottawa area or anywhere else, you can present for to one of our meetups, and so we take talks of various different sizes for your speaking in front of people comfort level. The other thing I want to shout out to is to our volunteers. And thank them for all the work they do to help support OWASP Ottawa. The other thing you're probably wondering about is actually seeing humans in person. And we do want to return to in-person meetups and still continue our live streaming. We have found a venue, but we want to do a dry run just to make sure that their internet works, the fluorescent lighting works, and the gravity works. So stay tuned for updates. We might try a stealth meetup in the location. But this evening, I want to welcome Abigail, who is a lawyer, a speaker, a writer, an educator that specializes in privacy. She's also a member of the MyData.org, which I hope to learn more about this evening. And she's here to speak to us about a very important topic about digital self-defense in a post-Roe world. So welcome, Abigail.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. Right, and that was a very helpful introduction. I'll just tell you very quickly a bit about MyData Canada. MyData Canada is a completely volunteer-run organization. We are the one of the newer hubs of MyData Global, the Canada hub. We've got a number of volunteers coming from a range of backgrounds. So some people who come more from the marketing world, venture capital, obviously IT, and then lawyers like myself, and privacy professionals and so on. And our focus is on promoting human-centric tech and moving towards more data self-determination. So a lot of Web3 sort of stuff. We will also contribute to consultations on new laws that are being put forward. And then we do a lot of awareness activities. And we actually have regular community events once a month. So we would like to extend a warm welcome to anyone in the OWASP community to come and join us. Sometimes those are vendor pitches of people who are PrivTech vendors, who specialize in privacy enhancing technology, and we give them really good feedback. Other times they're educational. We're going to, I'll be circulating in time for the second National Truth and Reconciliation Day, 2 presentations that we had done on Indigenous data sovereignty. So one that I had done from a settler's perspective, explaining my learning journey, and then the other one from Jeff Doctor with Anamiki. So keep an eye out for that. You'll see it on LinkedIn and on Twitter. Now about me, where am I? I'm based in what's currently known as Ottawa. It's the traditional unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabeg people, and I'm very grateful to be here where I live, work, and play, and grateful to those who came before me and who are still here as keepers of the land. I know you're all in other locations, and so I will just speak to the one where I am. All right, so let's begin. So there's a lot to cover in this, and you'll see there are a lot of slides here. My understanding is we make the slides available afterwards, so there are some that I'm going to skip through very quickly, but they all have links in them, so you can always read up more and follow whichever aspects interest you. So first of all, I'd like to sort of set out what the problem is. So what is the fallout from Roe? What does it mean from a digital privacy perspective? But I'll also speak to sort of what is privacy more broadly, because it's often misunderstood. Then third, I'll talk about what the digital privacy risks are post-Roe with some illustrative examples, because there are a whole host of risks and you'll see how they interplay with one another. And then importantly, how can we protect ourselves as individuals, as family members? And then what roles do developers and their clients play? And this will be very important for the OWASP crowd, especially because you advise a number of clients. So, are you helping or hindering people's efforts to, seek their reproductive rights and be able to have them? Are you contributing to the problem, or are you solving a problem? And I think a lot of you are trying to solve problems and are doing a lot of good stuff. There is more work to do because we're up against something really quite large, which you'll see very soon. So when Roe, what we already knew about the Roe versus Wade likely being overturned with the draft decision that was leaked. So there's a lot of time for people to react, and already people started talking about privacy. And we're talking about somebody's body, and it might not be we tend to focus on data privacy and informational privacy when we think about privacy, but this is where bodily privacy, so the right to the integrity and the autonomy of someone's own body, and for them to make decisions about their own body, and data privacy really collided with this ruling. So we were hearing about everyone saying you need to delete your fertility apps, you've got to be careful with your searches online, think about who you're chatting with, because all of that could be used against you at some point. So it got people already starting to delete their period tracking apps, but then in addition to that, starting to really think about digital privacy in general, and realizing, especially post-pandemic, how much time we've been spending online in the past 2 years with so many different gadgets, how much of a digital footprint we all have, and whether we can pull that back or protect ourselves in some way. So I've got two examples here, and I show them for a reason. So the first one is a link to a video, which some of you may have already seen. It's by Midas Touch, this American set of brothers that put out a whole bunch of different videos. And it's fictional, but it illustrates a young girl with her mother in the car being stopped by the police as they're about to cross the border. And this is just crossing state borders in the US. And the mother said, don't worry about it, I'll handle it. But you can see that basically what they illustrate here is that, your privacy is going to be so impacted that your movements are tracked, that you can't, you can't just cross state lines, even you're basically trapped, right? And so that this is the reality in a post-Roe world, is that the surveillance is everywhere and the control is everywhere. And it was trying to really bring that home. That was a fictional video. Around the time that, shortly after that video came out, all the stories about a 10-year-old girl who was forced to cross state lines in order to get an abortion, and the lawyer who helped her coming under fire and legal jeopardy the doctor coming under legal jeopardy for helping her, was all over the news, as a fundamental example of just how invasive this was. So we, again, seeing how our digital privacy and our physical privacy and our locational privacy all kind of converge, in this experience. Contrast that to another situation where, often when we think of privacy as secrecy, right? Very intimate details about my life. We don't talk about our miscarriages or our infertility challenges openly. It's considered to be something very secret. But what's happened with Roe is a lot of pregnant people have, or people who've previously had abortions, have shared very, very personal information online in an effort to help preserve people's autonomy and bodily autonomy and reproductive rights, by trying to help people understand that abortion is something much broader than just an unwanted pregnancy, that sometimes it relates to things like you don't have a viable pregnancy. So in this case of a Louisiana woman, she would have been forced to maintain a pregnancy that was clearly non-viable to a baby that wasn't even going to develop a skull because of uncertainty in the law. And the challenge with the law means that, that doctors aren't sure if they're going to face malpractice or even worse, lawsuits. And so they said, we really aren't sure if we can help you. So she actually made it a point to go out very publicly and share this very personal information very publicly to make a point and talk about, the impact of this on her and her privacy. So privacy.
Interrupt. Should the slides be changing?
No, I'm still on the Louisiana one.
Oh,
Okay. Oh, sorry. Oh, yeah, that is weird. Sorry. Yeah, it should have changed. You didn't see the.
No, we just see the front page.
Okay. How do we make that change? I'll stop sharing and then I'll share again. That's weird.
It's part of online presentations.
Okay. Doesn't seem to be giving me the option now. Okay, so let's try that again. Okay, can you see this now?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. So you missed my lovely table of contents slide as well then. Can you see that?
Feel free to rewind.
Okay, right. So I'm moving ahead and it's not loading somehow. Okay, I think I'm gonna have to stop screen and share it every time I switch screens, or is it because of the delay?
Well, you should be looking at the direct StreamYard screen, and that should be live. Is there like a PDF version or an exported version of this?
What I can do is share a link because I haven't downloaded it yet. Just a moment.
Maybe we'll have an interlude to talk about the technology of presentations and how Zoom has affected all our lives.
Yeah, we can. So, okay, look, I'm going to keep talking while I try to do this, and you will eventually see the slides because I don't want us to lose people. So, all right. So if we talk about, sorry. So what I was explaining just now is that when we talk about privacy, it's actually a pretty multi-layered thing. So I do want to just sort of set out the problem, though, when it comes to just reproductive rights and reproductive care and sort of some of the issues that that are concerning people. So we heard even last year about the Texas Bounty program that was in place. And that was basically it deputized any individual if they wanted to take a legal action, like a civil suit, against somebody who was helping somebody get an abortion. So it was trying to do indirectly what it couldn't do directly by deputizing people. And what this did was it turned everybody, your neighbor, everyone around you, into a possible sheriff, who could enforce, these privacy restrictions on you. Enforce these restrictions on you in terms of your bodily autonomy and what you could do. And so people were already starting to talk about some of this as, are people going to be listening in on your conversations? Are they tracking your periods? Are they going to be asking you questions? And if you answer those questions, like, what does that mean? And what's that going to do? So people were already talking about the change. And so from that, we already were hearing as well as far back as 2021 about, women being jailed for having miscarriages. And the assumption being that because it was a miscarriage, so in medical terms, we call that spontaneous abortion, I think is the term that it's called. That was being treated as something that was planned or that was prevented. So sorry, I'm a little distracted because I'm trying to give the
That's
link.
okay. So it sounded like Texas had sanctioned vigilantism.
Exactly, and it was modeled off of something that they used to have with the Fugitive Slave Act in the U.S. And I'm not a U.S. legal expert, but I know about this just from hearing about it. I put the link in there. So the idea that you would just deputize individuals, and what that does is it means you're being constantly surveilled by everyone around you. So the fabric of society is completely torn apart if you can't even trust your neighbor, right? It's extremely repressive to feel like anyone and everyone is always watching you. So this is this notion of surveillance. But worse than that is that your information can be used against you. You know, whether you send an innocent text to someone or something happens, and so keeping with that notion of abortion being something that that we tend to typically think of as somebody who didn't plan properly and they got pregnant. It's actually much more complex. There can be planned pregnancies that go awry, where a baby suddenly is no longer viable, and there's serious threats to the pregnant person if they are made to keep the baby, because then they can have sepsis and other things can happen, and there are a whole host of other issues. Okay, so you've got it up there?
I've got it up. Now I'm going to see if I can go through it. Okay. So
Okay.
tell me where to
All right. So the last one you were on just now is the Roe Gets Real. So that was the one that I was talking about with the video of the young girl. So you can play that and watch that on your own. And then the one below is the woman who went public with the fact that she had to leave from Louisiana and go all the way to New York to get abortion care. And obviously not everyone can do that. So if we go on to the next slide.
Yeah, so just say next slide and I'll be there.
So as I was saying, so I talked about the Texas bounty hunters, that's on the left. I talked about US women being jailed for having miscarriages. And, like, even if you look at the exceptions around abortion that exist in some states, whether it's endangers the life of the mother or it's been the cause of rape or incest, even being able to exercise that exception requires a lot of invasiveness, right? Like, how are you going to prove that it was rape? Does that mean you have, we already know that rape kits are extremely invasive. You've already suffered the most invasive indignity to your body by somebody who has completely disregarded your will and violated you, and then now you have to go through this process and get a rape kit, and then on top of that, the rape kits often they sit and they don't get tested at all, and then you're subjected to things like digital strip searches where they want to get all the information off of your phone, or they use a rape kit, as we heard recently, to not to find your rapist, but to find evidence that they can match against a database to see if you committed a burglary. So that was a recent one. So it's just, even the exceptions are extremely problematic and extremely invasive. So we have people like Chrissy Teigen, who last year was very public about, they were expecting a child. They were really excited. They'd even named the child. And then at 20 weeks, she announced that she had lost the baby. And so she called it a miscarriage. Well, now she's coming out and she's saying, we need to call it what it was. It was an abortion. So abortion care sometimes is, even if there's been a partial miscarriage, there's still, your body doesn't always eliminate the entire fetus. And so anyway, I don't want to go into a lot of the detail around this. It is an OWASP talk, but the point is that abortion care is much, much broader than just a teenager who forgot to take the pill. So, and as Indiana has a particularly stringent abortion ban that's come in, and there have been a number of other states in the U.S. And doctors are nervous and thinking about things like, am I even going to be able to get malpractice insurance? Do I even want to practice as a gynecologist or an obstetrician? Because it's such a hot potato. Like, what if I'm faced with a horrible situation of a woman who might be in crisis, or a pregnant person? And I say pregnant person because transgender people can also get pregnant. If I'm, in a situation, I'm supposed to make that call. I'm not ready for that. I just can't do it. And so it's going to have knock-on effects down the road in terms of access overall to care. So it has real world effects beyond just whether or not you have a child. Next slide, please. So if we look at some of the points that have been made about a number of the fears that people had in the past, a lot of them are coming true. And so the reason why I'm talking about the ripple effects and privacy and bodily integrity is because really what this is about is it's not ending. And again, we're talking about the US, but there is relevance to Canada, and I will get to that. But it's not ending with saying that we're going to make abortion difficult or impossible to access, but it's even going to things like birth control, same-sex marriage. So really getting into the most intimate parts of your life. And if we can be okay as a society with the most intimate details of our lives, of our families' lives, of our communities' lives, being subject to government decisions, or worse, some kind of bounty hunter who's going to decide, if and when we can exercise any kind of decision on what happens with our family planning or with our own bodies, then why would we bat an eyelash at a lesser privacy violation, right? Once we've accepted that level of control in such a fundamental way, which will affect pregnant people, but also all the people around them who love and care for them, the children who will be left without parents if their mother dies giving birth, or suffers afterwards, or who is grieving a child, a planned pregnancy that didn't work out and now is maybe facing even prison time, can't afford the medical bills and the legal bills that come with it. So in these slides, in these particular images, we're talking about a number of examples. There's even a military example as well, and I won't go into the details here, but so some people saying that this also presents a national security risk as well. So let's skip to the next slide, because we're a bit behind time now because of everything. So what it's really about, it's not really about protecting life. When you look at the actual outcomes of abortion bans, if the stated purpose is to protect life, someone's life, and even if it is to prioritize the life of the unborn child, as they like to say, it's really about control. And there's plenty of data on this, lots of writing on this, but abortion bans actually make people less healthy, less safe, and make society less safe. So some of the examples from this article that they mention are that they actually can not only prevent safe abortions, but the bans also can increase domestic abuse, because often when there are unwanted pregnancies, pregnant women actually are at a much higher risk of domestic violence. Sometimes domestic violence because the spouse or partner wants to kill the unborn, if you want to say the unborn child or the fetus, they want to terminate the pregnancy through violence, or because of a whole host of other reasons, because they're already in a difficult situation. Higher maternal infant mortality, preterm birth, low birth weight, a whole host of other things. And importantly, if you look in the US, they're saying the 14 most restrictive states invest the least in women and children's health. So if they were really concerned about health and life and everything else, then there would be congruence there. And what's really important to understand is that this isn't just about gender. Abortion bans disproportionately impact Black and marginalized people, and in the US has white supremacist origins. And so I've linked to two articles there that explain why there's that disproportionate impact. I can't get into all the details here, but also the origins of it. But one thing that we can say, and then we can understand, is that when laws are in place, especially punitive ones, they aren't applied equally. Some people have a lot more. They can get away with a lot more, they can hide a lot more, they can hire better lawyers, they're less targeted. And then when we think about also in terms of even just the financial side of things and being able to afford those services, it can be very expensive and very difficult. Now, the reason why I talk about control is also really important to privacy in general, including data privacy. So keep that in mind, and let's advance to the next slide. Now, as we talk about post-Roe, I want to put this in the broader perspective of talking about reproductive rights writ large. So forced birth, forced sterilization, forced family separation, those are all on a spectrum relating to how you plan your family, how you plan to expand your family or not. And they all undermine bodily autonomy and integrity. They all are affronts to the human dignity and self-determination of an individual. And they purport to be in the interests of the child, or in the interests of society, but are really about controlling a particular group, particular individuals. So in Canada, we have seen forced sterilizations of Indigenous women. And again, the interaction between data privacy and bodily privacy is evident there when you're already you're about to go under for surgery in the context of delivering a baby, and now you're given a consent form that you're forced to sign, or you can't even really read what it is, and you just need to get into surgery. And really now it turns out you've agreed to be sterilized as part of the procedure. I mean, things like this have been alleged to be have happened, and there are some class actions underway in Canada for that. And similarly, birth alerts. So this whole notion, and I've got it on a subsequent slide, but this whole notion of if social workers are concerned, or anyone in the circle of care believes there's some kind of risk to the child, and there's no real threshold for it, then they can alert, child services or child and family welfare, whatever it is in whichever province you're in, and then they will arrange to come in and take the newborn baby, or conduct an inspection. And then often that leads to child separation. So the children forcibly taken away from their parents, taken halfway across the country, placed with non-Indigenous communities, non-Indigenous families. And really it's a tool of colonization and genocide, and not an effort to actually protect the children. And more often than not, it's because the families are considered to be at risk because they are poor. And they're poor for a whole host of reasons. And they will still pay another family to take care of the child. So why not just give the money to those families to take care of their own children or the communities? So there's a whole piece in there. I won't go much further into that, but I just want to put it in perspective that this is a multi-layered thing. But what you need to keep in mind is this notion of control. So let's skip to the next slide. So what is privacy then? Because I've been talking about it a lot, but I haven't really defined it. So it's not just about confidentiality. So while confidentiality and security are really important, because without confidentiality, then we can't have privacy, because we don't have any control over who has access and who can find out stuff about us, or gather information on us. It's not in and of itself the whole picture. If you look at privacy laws, they tend to be built around 10 privacy principles. And when I say privacy laws, I mean the standard ones like PIPEDA, like the Quebec Private Sector Act, like GDPR. And really what they are is the ones that we think about, they tend to be data privacy laws. So they're focused on one type of privacy, which is information privacy for the most part. When we look at things like cookie rules and all that kind of stuff, then we're getting into privacy more broadly. And I'll explain that in a moment. So let's look at the fair information principles first. So what they require from a business or an organization is that they have to be honest, right? They have to tell people what they're doing. They have to make sure that they're accountable for what they do with people's personal information. They have to limit what they do with the personal information. So again, this is more than confidentiality, right? Because you may be the right person who is supposed to have access to this information, but only for certain uses, and only to share with certain people, if at all, and only to hold on for a certain amount of time. Similarly, accuracy, right? The personal information has to be accurate. If it's out of date and decisions are being made about it, for example, a decision about whether or not someone is considered to be at risk, based on information that is not accurate. Well, sorry, we should be on the next slide. I forgot to tell you to advance. Yeah, the next one. Right. Then we're not making good decisions. So keeping it accurate. And then the important thing is it's their data, right? So people have access rights. They have a right to a copy of their data. In some cases, they have a right to correct it, and a whole host of other rights. So it's not just property in the traditional sense when we think of our company's assets. So keeping it secure, which is down on the bottom, you can see it's just one of 10 other principles, right? Obviously, you have to identify security risks and address them, but you also need to think about, how to deal with complaints if people are not happy with what you're doing, making sure that you actually have a justification for doing what you're doing. So having people's consent, which means real choice, meaning they actually did agree to give you this stuff. Or if it's not consent, you have some other lawful ground, which you do in different jurisdictions, and you have exceptions to consent as well in Canada, well, then that you have justified and met the requirements for that exception. But really importantly, from the get-go, and this is what I really want to emphasize, well, actually the next two here are really identifying your purpose. If you don't have a purpose, and that purpose has to be a lawful one, for collecting personal information, then and using it, then you shouldn't be using it. And so what you collect really should be limited to what you strictly need in order to do that. Those are the principles. In our digital world, we blow all of those apart, especially when it comes to the online world. And I'll explain that, and we'll see the consequences of that and what that means in terms of Roe. So data privacy is a type of privacy. It's a really important part of privacy. But if we flip to the next slide, it's not the only type of privacy harm or issue that we need to think about. So this is not my infographic. It's the author of Strategic Privacy by Design has put this together based on Professor Daniel Solov's taxonomy of privacy, and it goes into a number of different things, some of which do require information collection, but some of which don't. So like information collection can be used to surveil people, right? If you're listening in on their conversations, that can be surveillance. But you can also be surveilling people or saying that you're surveilling people and have an impact on their lives, whether or not you collect their data. Decisional interference, for example, is another thing. So either by not giving someone accurate information or telling them what they can or cannot do, or what decisions they can make, can be an actual invasion of their privacy. So if you look at the four sort of squares in the middle there, they've sort of grouped them into four, information processing, information dissemination, information collection, and invasion, and then explained all of them in more detail. I'm not going to go over all of these. This is here for your reference, but the reason why I've put it all in here is because I'm going to illustrate with some examples, and I want you to think about some of these and come back to them later when you do have the deck, so you can think about it when you're designing or reviewing some of the tech that you might be helping to release. But what you really need to understand then is privacy is not just about the personal information that you have. It's not just about data. It really is about self-determination and dignity. And the fact is, in real life, we pay a really steep price for our big digital footprints. So if we flip to the next slide. So some examples, if we think about surveillance or interrogation, surveillance is being watched. Interrogation is being asked questions or being asked for information. Even if you don't provide information, being asked by someone, when was the first day of your last menstrual period? And your teacher is the one asking you that in a state with an abortion ban. They might be thinking you're pregnant. They might be planning to snitch on you. Maybe they're looking at a bounty because teachers don't make a lot of money. That's going to change. That's going to make you feel like you have to change your behavior. It's going to make you uncomfortable. Being surveilled means that if you're aware of the surveillance or you suspect the surveillance is happening, then you're thinking about, I don't want them to see me doing this or to read about me saying that. So that's where the delete your fertility app thing comes from, or erase your Google search history because somebody is always watching. So the fact of being surveilled all of the time, even if it's not actually happening, but it's something that we're threatened with happening, is an intrusion on someone's life and is very stifling. And it's when we have so many different places where that can happen, then you start to feel like you're in a bit of a digital panopticon. So you can't just move about in the world. It's sort of an ambient non-privacy that exists. If you look at something like digital interference, it undermines your freedom and your choices because either someone's telling you you can't do certain things. So for example, angry protesters outside an abortion clinic, they're trying to dissuade you from getting the abortion care that you need. They're trying to intimidate you. They're yelling at you. They're saying things. So that's an attempt to interfere with your decision. But there are much more subtle ways that our decisions are interfered with, and a really big one in the digital world is through what we call dark patterns or deceptive design. I prefer to say deceptive design because I'm just getting tired of us associating dark with evil so much, and I think there are a lot of problems with that. So I'll use manipulative or deceptive design. Deceptive design would be things like you're trying to click through and find out how to cancel your account, or how to say no to all of the tracking that Facebook does, and they make you do like 20 different clicks and send you around in circles on some carousel to do that, but opting in and saying yes to all of the tracking and all of the data sharing takes one click. That's an example of a deceptive design, and there's an entire website and Twitter feed devoted to it called Dark Patterns. So that's another way of interfering with people's decisions. And we see this in the app world, and we see this in the website world, where you're kind of given these buttons and you're trying to press, and then you can't quite click the close button. So now you've just accepted all the cookies and the trackers, and you really don't know what happened there. Then we get to intrusion, and it said blackmail on the other slide, but I'm using the word extortion. But this whole notion of whether or not I know anything more about you, I'm going to be in your face all the time. So one type of intrusion that we've all experienced and we find annoying, and our laws have been quick to address, is spam, right? The idea that you're always getting spammed with stuff. That's really invasive and intrusive. Deleting all the spam, trying to sort through it and figure everything out is really hard. It takes time away from you and it's exhausting. But imagine the spam that you're getting is all related to, you've got to keep that baby. These are myths about abortion. You could also get that kind of spam, and that could be really problematic. You can get spam from a cyber bully as well. Extortion is do this or else, right? So in some cases, if you want to be able to take out a mortgage, you need to fill out this, you need to give us all of this information, for your credit score, and you also have to opt into other things. You're in a situation where now you're being told do this or else, and so you have to give up your information or you have to do something. So we see that a lot as well. On the intrusion side, there was a lot of coverage, and there has been a lot of coverage in the news about journalists on a kill list. So this doesn't relate to reproductive rights specifically, but it's important because the journalists were mostly women of color, and they were mostly people who had spoken out. And so this was a deliberate attempt to silence them, and continues to be a deliberate attempt through harassing messages with a lot of violence. If you click on the link, the kill list for journalists, you'll see they describe the emotional toll, and one person described it as an emotional tax that her colleagues, particularly her white male colleagues, don't have to bear. And so she's trying to do her normal job and her day job, but now she's thinking about her safety. Often these things will intertwine, because what happened in those emails was they would be saying things like, we've got people pretending to be homeless who are really watching them, and they're going to let us know when they're in the building so we can attack them. Whether or not that's true, now that's something they're thinking about. And when they walk into their building or in front of their house and they see someone who's homeless, they're going to feel unsafe. They're not going to trust that person. So it can be, this intrusion is not something to be taken lightly. It really is something that can have significant effects on individuals and on democracy, right? Because if our journalists are silenced, if they're quitting their jobs because they don't feel safe, then we only have the bullies left, right? We don't have anyone holding anyone to account. Then you look at something which we see a lot online, exposure or distortion. So things like trying to damage somebody's reputation by spreading false information about them, sharing their details, sharing information about them that no one knew before, leaking that online, but like in particular exposing certain things about them. That can have reputational harm, but it can also lead to violence sometimes as well. And it can also interfere just with their day-to-day. So the example I gave the birth alerts example, but then doxing is one that we see a lot. So someone says, yeah, so-and-so lives at such and such an address. And so, or they figure out based on a photo that you've put online that you are in this location and you're at this address or you're here. So people can then harass you and threaten you even in your own home. We saw that in the gamer world with Gamergate. And then most recently, if we switch to the next slide, you'll see that in the, not the next slide, but I'll show you in the subsequent slide. We've seen that with different activists or even people who've just posted something online. So next slide. So the one on the left is the example. If you just one more slide over. That's the journalist one. So I do invite you to read that. There's also a podcast interview on This Matters with this woman. So she left Pakistan because she was being threatened by the Taliban and by others, and now she's being threatened here in Canada. It's ridiculous. There's another one in the middle about the victim's family, an Indigenous woman who was killed by a white 17-year-old who was just out of no reason, without any kind of provocation, threw this very heavy boat anchor at her, and she suffered very bad internal injuries. She was in agonizing pain for 6 months and eventually died. Over that time, they smeared her reputation online. They smeared her family. They had a Facebook group that was just amplifying that message, making it intolerable. So in addition to the suffering that they faced of losing a loved one to a heinous crime that was completely unjustified, and the guy getting off on top of that, they had this doxing and this harassment, this constant invasions, and just trying to make their lives a complete hell for no reason other than the fact that, well, it's motivated by racism, really. And then now it's at the point where if you search up the name of the case or even of the killer, it's this woman who is the victim of the killer whose image pops up. And so he has the luxury of privacy in the sense that his identity is still concealed. His identity is not out there for everyone to see, but the family is completely smeared. The Kiwi Farms example is another one of the doxing that I was talking about. So a trans rights, that's the one on the far right. She had posted something in defense of a trans rights group, and then all these people from Kiwi Farms, which is a platform, decided they were just all going to attack her, dox her. She actually left the country. At some point, she posted a picture online, just like from her website, from her hotel room, and somebody looked at some of the stuff in the background and used open source intelligence techniques to identify where she was specifically, and then revealed that. I mean, it was really, really horrible. And the way she described it, and I think this is really helpful, is that the intention is to disconnect the person from all sources of support. So if we think again about privacy as control, as dignity, as something essential to your self-determination, this is the kind of stuff that cyberbullying does, right? That intrusion on your life, that exposure, just meant to silence a person and completely marginalize them. So next slide. So how does Roe impact our digital privacy? Well, in a lot of ways. I already gave the example of just the decisional interference that I illustrated earlier. A lot of people on the next slide were concerned about law enforcement requests and what it meant, even just with the Texas abortion ban. So this is the bounty. This is even before the overturning of Roe. People were worried about, are tech companies going to be responding to subpoenas? Because if they're lawful subpoenas, usually they have lawful access policies and they are required to turn that data over. So a lot of people were already worried about law enforcement using court orders and subpoenas. Similarly, privacy advocates were worrying about Google searches, because Google searches can be very rich. They're used in criminal investigations all the time. So people were worried about searches. And again, people were like, oh my gosh, my search, somebody else knows about my searches. Why do they know about your searches? Because they want to be able to target you with ads. And they don't need to know that you're searching. They just need to know that someone is searching, but they want to know what you're searching for so they can target you with stuff and then match it with things that they read in your email and so on. But it's not just about law enforcement. In fact, it's not just about subpoenas. Law enforcement doesn't need to go to the trouble and have the oversight mechanisms that are supposed to be in there to ensure our privacy is properly protected by a neutral third party that's going to look dispassionately at the case presented before it and decide, yes, this is a case where that infringement of someone's privacy is justifiable in a free and democratic society. That's what a subpoena, when it's properly done and properly presented, is supposed to do. It's supposed to find those checks and balances, because there are cases where law enforcement do need to legitimately conduct searches of our Mar-a-Lago, for example, to retrieve national security documents and things like that. But the fact is, they don't really need to do the subpoenas. They can just go, just like anybody else who wants to go to a data broker, or they can use tools that are readily available by private sector entities to use mass location or location tracking, geofencing tools. They can just buy a bunch of data with a credit card. So on the right, this is something by Zach Edwards. He's an adversarial privacy engineer who's done amazing work. Sorry, if you flip over to the next slide. So on the right-hand side, he actually has done a lot of studies where he looks at the, the actual data flows. He gets under the hood to see like, where's the data actually going? What kind of code do we have in these different apps? Or sometimes it's websites, but often it's apps. And he, along with what was called the Me2B Alliance, but is now called the Internet Safety Lab, found out that actually there's a lot of really, really granular data that's being bought and sold openly on the market, and anyone with a credit card could really access that. So it doesn't have to be the police. It could be your annoying neighbor who really wants to get you in trouble, or somebody looking for a bounty. So definitely do read that article. We'll flip to the next slide. And it's not always nefarious people or greedy people who are doing this, right? So sometimes it's people who are intending to help us that can unintentionally harm us by sharing without even realizing that they're sharing. So right now, Meta, which is the company that owns Facebook, is actually getting into a lot of trouble, again, because health data privacy issues have emerged with respect to websites of things like hospitals and clinics. Why? Because there are Facebook trackers and pixels, that are on these websites, just as they are on so many websites. The information that's going in as people try to book appointments and things like that has been leaking through to Facebook, and Facebook just has loads and loads of information on you. And those pixels, they allow you to be tracked across the web. So you go to the website, you book an appointment, you go somewhere else, you check in on Facebook, you do whatever, and it's just all being tracked everywhere. And so really, really detailed profiles exist. That data, hospitals should not be presenting or sharing or leaking data that their patients are giving them to seek care. So this is a big issue. This was exposed by the Markup, which has been doing some fantastic work just on privacy, on tech, and definitely check out their website. I've linked to some things at the end on that, but you can click on here and you'll find a link. The link takes you right to the Markup. Hey Jane, up on the top right hand here is an online abortion pill provider. And again, they didn't realize, like, they really, I don't think we're trying to do this, but they had 4 different analytics providers, plus they had Stripe as their payment provider. And they had, what else? Oh, they had not a chat feature, a reviews feature with a company called review.io or something, I can't remember. And people could post their reviews. Information from the reviews even, which included identifiable information, was being linked not only to the analytics providers, but even to Stripe. So again, that's information that shouldn't be out there, especially when it's now dangerous in some parts of the US to be buying something like the abortion pill. And then there are data marketplaces that are just making a killing, or were making a killing, selling period information about people who use period tracking apps. So Clue data had ended up in this marketplace. Again, Zach and the gang did a lot of really good research on this, but they're not the only ones. There are other privacy researchers that have been doing this kind of these kinds of discoveries. And what we're finding is that location data especially is really, really valuable. And these data brokers are making a lot of money telling people, where people who are looking for abortion care are. And there are anti-choice groups that have been using smartphone surveillance to target what they call, quote unquote, abortion-minded women during clinic visits. So you can target advertising in a number of different ways, or you can target messaging to people in a number of different ways, just using what is available in the ad tech marketplace, right? So that can be really great if you want to post a job to somebody who's in the geographic region of the hospital you want, then you think, okay, well, we'll just make sure that anyone's in this region, they can get pinged with an ad. Well, what they were doing was actually trying to, again, engage in decisional interference without necessarily knowing who they were pinging. We're still sending these disturbing messages. So it's bad enough that you've got people outside. Now you're on your phone to check in with your friend who's trying to see how you're doing, and you're getting these horrible spammy emails or messages of some kind, or ads, sometimes spreading disinformation at a very, very vulnerable moment in your life. So this actually was before the overturning of Roe. So somebody came up with this idea, and you'll read about it in the article, a couple years ago, like, we've got all this ad tech this is a niche market, right? I can help the anti-choice groups target the people they want to target. And I talked about decisional interference earlier, and I keep harping on it, but it's important in this age of disinformation because it's not just about someone, in this marketplace of ideas, as people like to say, just putting information out there and then you choosing between different things. Facebook has gotten into trouble again for amplifying disinformation about a controversial abortion reversal procedure, but then downplaying information and sometimes making it hard to show up in people's feeds, using its algorithm when it relates to medical abortion or something like the abortion pill. So legitimate information is not getting pushed up and not showing up. And so what you're doing is you're actually putting the thumb on the scale of people who are promoting disinformation that makes it hard for people to exercise reproductive choice. So, and again, I keep forgetting to tell you to advance the slides. So if you can go to the next slide, you'll see the anti-choice groups one, and then the slide after that will be the targeting ads one. All right, so next slide. Where do they get all that data? Well, we're all possibly, if we're not careful, guilty, not just because we haven't complied with privacy laws, but because we're participating in a marketplace and an economy that is very premised on surveillance. So your website, your app, your mailing list, which gets repurposed because of the mail platform that you use, your smart camera, your speaker, your wearable, your video conferencing app, your likes, your views, all these different things, all of that data is very, very valuable. Even your social graph. So Garth and I are Twitter friends, and we often retweet each other's tweets, and people who like his tweets tend to sometimes also like my tweets. Well, you can easily put a social graph together, and that's very valuable. That was one of the things I think that Clubhouse was very interested in when it first came out, was more your social graphs than the content of your conversations. Maybe they were interested in that too. If you flip to the next slide, so we leave digital traces everywhere we go. And again, we talked about law enforcement, but law enforcement, I think, has nothing on these data brokers. I mean, they've got way more data, I think, on us than MI5 in the UK, for example. Can you flip to the next slide, please? Not to mention that there have been so many breaches that our data has spilled out all over the place. And I didn't even include the Tim Hortons app, which shows also a lot of from that recent decision, shows a lot of data that was being harvested without any purpose, because in the end, Tim Hortons decided to scrap the loyalty program. But anyway, so next slide. The biggest culprit, that's not the only culprit, but the biggest culprit right now is the spying device we have in our pockets. Our phones are big snitches. They capture so much data, and they're with us all the time, and they're always reaching out. And so we leave a very, very long digital trail. And some of that information may be accurate, or some of it may be inferred and could be incorrect, but it's used to do things like credit scores and to make other kinds of decisions about us. And it's really gotten out of control. Add to that your Roomba, which by the way is owned by Amazon, which is a big data broker, but not as big in the ad tech world as Facebook and Google, but also still has an important ad tech position. Your smart TV, which is listening to you all the time and is going to be used, if it's not already, to target you with ads based on what you're saying or what you're watching. Your Fitbit, which is taking in all kinds of detailed information about your health status, which at one point you didn't have to use it with the app, but now you do have to use it with the app. And so you can't really get away from all of that data collection. So if you want to know more about how the phone has become a challenge for people, then have a look at the article there. All right, so let's skip ahead. So surveillance capitalism, I've talked about this. I'll let you read the quote on your own, but it's basically, we've set up an entire marketplace on the basis of surveilling people. And so it's not surprising now that that surveillance is being taken and used by nefarious actors, and sometimes even by people, people are unwitting accomplices in that, even when they are intending to offer help. Next slide. It goes hand in hand with disinformation. So Maria Ressa, who sounded the alarm in 2016, prior to 2016, she was seeing what was happening in the Philippines with Facebook disinformation, and their elections before Duterte was targeted, warned everyone about this, and we didn't heed her warnings, and we saw Cambridge Analytica happen, and we're still seeing the fallout from it. She's been really on top of this, and she's got her people versus tech 10-step plan. And this quote really does show how these things all fit together. You know, the amplification of discrimination, the toxicity, the weaponizing of our information against us, the disinformation that is, that is being plied and basically uses the ad tech machinery that exists, which was originally meant for a perfectly fine purpose, you can argue, to use it to do things like target disinformation or redline people. There's just a whole host of issues around it. And so she's got a 10-step plan for how to address it. So now this has been all doom and gloom. I appreciate it must be very frustrating for people, but let's move into what we can do about it. So how can we protect ourselves? So flip on to the next slide. As challenging and as toxic as this surveillance-driven ecosystem is, we have some options for now. And I think there's a lot of stuff that's already going on. So make a plan. There are 4 or 5 guides that I've put here, and there's so many other ones available. I like the security planner that it's now Consumer Reports that has it, but it was originally Citizen Lab that had come up with it. And it takes you through a series of questions, and based on how you describe yourself, it spits out a plan for you of what you can do. Because as you'll see from the subsequent slides, there are so many different ways that you can shut things down or you can regain more control. The question is then going to be, well, where do I begin? The one in the middle, it's for journalists, but again, it's helpful for a lot of people. It's got a step-by-step digital hygiene practice with a bunch of different cards. So you can look at the ones that are of interest to you. You can, if you click on this, you'll get the link, or you can scan the QR code and find it. But it's called Troll Busters, and they've got lots of helpful information there. And then the EFF, the Electronic Frontier Foundation, has their surveillance self-defense kit, and they have additional, if you're in a higher risk category, you're a journalist or you're somebody who is like, let's say, a political dissident or something, they have different ranges. So if you're just your average consumer, well, then here are some things you can do, but here are the extra things you might want to do if you're an informant, a whistleblower, a journalist, or so on. And then interestingly, children's privacy is not talked about enough. And with COVID and school going online, it was just the ed tech and ad tech worlds just completely melded. And so much of our kids' data, so much targeting of our kids, and so many intrusions were taking place and are taking place. They're trying to crack down on that. California's got an age-appropriate design code modeled after the one from the UK. They're trying to do a lot more with legislation here in Canada and in the US. Not enough, in my view, for Canada. But what Mozilla, the makers of the private browser Firefox, have put together is a set of things that you can do is called the Tech Talk. So getting your kids ready, or even if your kids are older and they're already online, making sure that they're online safely. So I did the talk before they had this tool. I did my own talk with the kids and walked them through various things, some of the things that are that I'll share with you here. But this one is much more structured. So definitely use that with your kids, or even with your grandparents or your parents, because sometimes they're the ones who are the most gullible. No pun intended, but we have seen the Facebook generation, right? So, all right, next slide. So how do we approach it? So I've got sort of a number of key areas where you want to do a bit of a digital detox. One is you need to know yourself. You need to know what's going on, not know yourself, but know what's going on with your personal information, and use your privacy settings. So this is getting easier because there's been a real push, not just by regulators, but also by consumer demand, to know what's happening with your data. And so people are making data subject access requests. They're looking at the privacy labels, for example, in the App Store, and making decisions based on that. Then they're using their privacy settings. So for example, if you can say no, or you can manage your cookies or manage your opt-ins and opt-outs for things like whether you want to get certain newsletters or whether you want your information shared with vendors at a conference or not. use those privacy settings, take that moment, just take a little bit of time to actually say no to some of the more invasive cookies. What's happening now more than ever, I'm seeing a lot of companies are getting nervous about the defaults being privacy invasive, and they're defaulting to strictly necessary cookies. But that's not always the case. And cookies aren't enough, right? You can be tracked with things like canvas fingerprinting, digital fingerprinting of your website, and educated guesses and stuff without actually dropping cookies. Strong passwords are also really important, but they're hard, especially if we make them complex. I'm sure you talk about this in OWASP all the time, so I'm not going to talk about it too much. But things like password managers can help. Finding clever ways to make memorable but difficult to guess passwords. There's lots of guidance on that. And I've got examples here. We talk about VPNs. Often VPNs will have some anti-tracking and ad blockers bundled in. A lot of the VPNs actually do that now, and you can choose even within those settings. Well, for now, I just want the VPN part. I don't want to block the other trackers. So you have a lot of choices there. So private search engines, private chat, private email. So we don't need developers scanning our inboxes to find out whether or not to pitch an ad to us for a vacation in Honolulu. It's not their business. Get a private email account that doesn't monetize itself through rifling through your drawers and finding out your deepest, darkest secrets. Same with chats, same with calls. Take your rights, exercise them, and where we are moving into a Web3 world. There are a lot of data wallets and personal data accounts and things like that that are out there that you'll see on the My Data Global website. So if we skip to the next slide, what I've done is I've included a bunch of examples. I'm not endorsing any particular one. You have to make your own choices and decide if these things are good for you. But it's just to give you a taste of just, there's so much great stuff out there. And I have links to most of them on here, but I'll have to just make sure I've got all the links in. One thing that I thought was really handy, remember I talked about the hospitals and Facebook pixels leaking data. If you use the Mozilla Firefox browser and then you get the extension for the Facebook container, it automatically blocks that sharing. It blocks that transmission of data about you. So you get a little symbol up there. It's very fun to see that symbol because then you know, okay, it's not being shared onwards. Because you don't have to have a Facebook account for Facebook to have data on you. They have data on everybody. There's a privacy analyzer. So a lot of really cool tools. Privacy Badger, for example, can tell you, well, it'll block something and then you can say, no, go ahead. I'm fine with Spotify, with using this widget. You can even enhance your YouTube. Shh, don't let them hear that I said that. So that you're not, when that is on and you're watching through your browser, you're not being tracked. If you're logged in though, then they're gonna be able to stitch some of the things together. So a whole host of other things. Ghostery is another add-on that I like to have. It shows you what kind of trackers are on. And a lot of the browsers that come bundled with our computers now are even starting to do this automatically and just tell us, oh, there are trackers here. Mozilla, again, they've got a privacy not included guide for a whole host of different products. And there's even one, they've got an entire section on reproductive health as well. So that goes to informing yourself. Let's go to the next slide. Same thing, privacy report cards. There are ways to clean up your online presence. You can get private browsers. You can see if your password's been pwned. Next slide. Even on the social side, you can find less, social networking tools that have tried to give you a lot more control over what you do with your data. Now, I haven't checked out Gather recently. When I first checked it out, it was pretty cool, but it was pretty new. But the extent of tracking that would be in it would depend on what kind of add-ins that you put into it. So I just want to put that caveat out there. I use Guild. I have a PrivTech Nation Guild. It's like a private community, a digital fireside chat. And we're a bunch of privacy geeks who are really enthusiastic about privacy. And if you want to join the conversations, we have all kinds of interesting conversations there. So Guild is one that I like, and that's one that I do know that they made a real effort. Privacy by Design was a big piece of their value proposition. Then you've got things like Mastodon, which is decentralized and is, sorry, next slide, is sort of, next slide. Sorry. oops, one before. Mastodon, social networking, it's decentralized, so you can set up your own Mastodon server, and then you can have people in your community. So it's microblogging, but on a federated basis. So, and then within that, you can have your own terms and manage your own group. And then they have their overarching terms, which is they don't accept, they're not going to have like 4chan type stuff happening on there, because they won't accept, violence and threats of violence and discrimination and so on. So now that's what you can do as a digital citizen. I know I covered a lot. There's so much in there, but again, once you get the deck, you'll be able to click on those links. You can go down a rabbit hole. One of my friends actually ended up in a situation where they had filled out a form online, and then all these weird things started to happen, and suddenly they got they used to laugh and joke about me being such a privacy nerd and being so paranoid, and suddenly they were more paranoid than anybody. And like over the course of a few days, like, the guy completely wiped his phone. He installed Signal. He had VPNs galore. He had a bunch of other things. Like, he was set up within a weekend, and new email account, all kinds of things, because he, was heading into a high security situation and did not want to be leaving a big digital footprint. So it is possible. All right, next slide. What can organizations and developers do? So what role do you play? Well, the first thing is you really need to stop feeding the beast. You have to stop, if it's you developing the website or working with an agency, they need very clear instructions not to be putting all kinds of junk in your website. Now, as OWASP folks, I think you're probably already aware of a lot of these things. I noticed that OWASP has a privacy top 10. That's fantastic. So they're already thinking about this. But let's skip over to the next slide and talk about it, just first starting from a business perspective, because the businesses that you advise are going to need to think about these things, and you, as well as somebody who's assisting them, needs to understand where they're coming from. So really think before you click in terms of a business that's thinking to take on a new software as a service product, or develop an app in collaboration with someone, or integrate or use that API. Why do I need this product and service? What's your real end game? Is it just bells and whistles? Do you need all the fancy, extensive analytics that Google Analytics provides, or would you be fine with 4 or 5 data points? How does it actually help you achieve those goals while remaining true to your values? And a lot of companies are very fixated, at least on projecting that they care about things. So all that ESG stuff we see, and being a good corporate citizen, some of them actually do want to be good people and good corporate people. So, are you being consistent with that? A hospital sharing data with a potentially hostile data broker is not really living up to its values. Then what data will it capture? Strip away any of the data bloat. So a lot of them come with out-of-the-box functionality. They often have all kinds of privacy functionality built in if you're choosing wisely, and you should. I forgot to mention that step of just do your due diligence and choose good providers and good service providers and good tools that already have this baked in privacy functionality, so that you can disable the unnecessary plugins, or configure things to the most privacy protective settings. And it does mean that you're going to need to really review those coding libraries and SDKs to make sure that you're not just blindly accepting whatever source code they've provided to you, because, and especially if you're developing apps and you're choosing app development frameworks that were designed for ad tech, they are designed to be leaky and share all kinds of information, and they don't really give you a lot of control to roll that back. So choose wisely again when you are developing. Think about privacy preserving development frameworks to the extent that they exist, and think about privacy patterns as well, and adopting good privacy patterns. Think about also, well, why and how is this information going to be used, or this tool? Think about the whole life cycle of it, and the data supply chain and the vendor ecosystem. That's where it gets really complicated, because if you're trying to do surveillance-based or tracking-based advertising as opposed to contextual advertising using real-time bidding, there's no way to protect privacy with that. The reason why we have these data brokers that have so much data is largely due to that. They're constantly buying and selling it, sharing it, enriching it, inferring things from it, doing all kinds of stuff to it. And you really don't have control over it. And sometimes it starts with something as simple as you not disabling the tracking code that widget that you've installed on your website has, or something that you've built into your app. So whose interests are really being served? And for you as a business, you might also be leaking some corporate confidential information as well. So you have an interest in protecting your digital assets also. And then finally, is there a less privacy invasive alternative? So use what's necessary and proportionate. Do you even need to know? Does the person need to have a sign-on for what they're trying to do with you? Are there other ways? Replace surveillance tech, like I said, with ready-made tools that are good and they've built in privacy settings and privacy functionality that you can use and offer to your clients or your end users. So next step. So it's daunting. Again, next slide. We're way over time, but I think we lost time in the beginning, so I'm almost at the end. Take stock of what you're collecting or allowing to be collected, trim the fat, and give control back to people. Those three things will be so important in making sure that you're helping preserve people's digital autonomy, which means they will also be able to take greater steps to preserve their bodily autonomy, which is why we're here having this conversation in the first place. So a few examples as a business, and again, try these out yourself. These aren't endorsements. Next slide. So if you're trying to do analytics, you don't have to surveil people in a really, really creepy way that is a lot of where you're following them all across the web and doing all kinds of creepy things. You can use a tool like Matomo or Simple Analytics. There are many others as well. Simple Analytics really just collects the bare minimum. It's a lot of it, like Fathom is another one. Right away, they truncate IP address. The geography is not specific to location. They'll maybe do it at country level, or you can vary that a bit. So whereas Matomo has a lot of features, but it's all yours, 100% data, no data sampling. So a lot of even some regulators are using Matomo, but a lot of companies are using Matomo because they have a lot more flexibility with what happens with the data. Then there are personal data accounts. I've given a couple of examples here. You'll find a lot more on the My Data Global site, and I've got a link to that on one of these slides. So you can engage with people on their terms. With the Web3 world coming, you're actually going to be more cutting edge anyway if you're taking your federated approach and letting people hold on to their data while you transact with them or you engage with them. And then with advertising, I mean, there are other ads. I talked about contextual advertising. You're going to get a really, really good discount. And there's an ad fraud expert who called Dr. Augustin Fu. Definitely try and follow him on LinkedIn, on Twitter, and check out his newsletter. He really goes into the weeds and looks at what's happening in terms of bots clicking on ads and, how much are you actually getting with all those data points? And he's made the case very convincingly that you're getting a way better deal with contextual or with fewer data points. You don't need all of that tracking-based really, really detailed information about people. It's kind of what he calls digital snake oil. So something like Good Loop, for example, allows you, it's sort of built for engagement. You give, you show a video ad of 30 seconds. If the person watches for 15 seconds, then they can choose which of the 4 charities that you can donate part of the proceeds to. And they actually get a lot of people watching the ads all the way to the end. So in terms of engagement and eyeballs, you're getting a lot of people watching your ads all the way through, which is more than you can say for, the hazy bot traffic that you're not even sure is a real human. And then Brave ads, again, that's Edge Analytics. There's, I think I have a link in here to the YouTube video that explains how it works. But Brave is a private browser. And then same thing with, your newsletters that you send out. I've put a little exclamation point here beside review because Twitter ended up buying them, and Twitter has loads of data. And so I don't know. The markup had chosen the review because it was the only one that allowed them to totally turn off pixels in their mail. It's really hard to get an email marketing platform that doesn't have all kinds of pixels. There are other things like MailJet, for example, which you could use, and a few others as well that are a bit better about that. But review was designed for publishers, and so that's why they had chosen that one. I'm just a little bit concerned that they were bought by Twitter and what that means. Next slide. My Data Global has a whole host of what we call My Data operators. So they're companies that have set up their infrastructure and their technology for human-centric personal data management, and they're designed to be interoperable. So a whole host of different data intermediaries that you can find there, and some really everything from personal data accounts to privacy protective health apps, to a bunch of other things. So really, really interesting stuff going on there. Definitely check that out. Next slide. This is the last one. There's so many more resources I could have put on here. I think I am going to add a few more before I share this with Garth to share with you. If you're developing apps, I think the French Data Protection Authority called CNIL did a brilliant job with their GDPR developers guide. It's designed for apps. For app developers, and they've got like 10 or 12, maybe even more different cards where they go through the detail of what are the different things you need to think about when you're developing apps. And so it really is designed for you, for developers. Linden.org. So Linden is a privacy threat risk modeling methodology that was created and modeled after Stride. So Stride, as you know, in the infosec world, cybersec world. So Linden, they've also gamified it. It's a lot of fun. I've used Linden Go, which is their lighter gamified version, to do sort of very quick turnaround, like high level data protection impact assessments with some of my my clients who do software development. You can accomplish quite a lot. You're not going to get as deep as you would doing a full blown Linden, doing the full-blown methodology, but you can get pretty far and cut down a lot of risks right there. There's an open source code for privacy engineering called FIDES, and another one called privacycode.ai, which is also out there. So these are things you can use. There's the Privacy Blue Book, which I haven't linked into here. And then also there's the OWASP Top 10 Privacy. So I wanted to link to that for you, and then an OWASP presentation out of Brussels that I came across that I thought might be of interest to the audience as well. So there's lots of stuff out there. NIST also has a whole privacy engineering section, and they're on GitHub. If you look up privacy engineering on GitHub, you're going to find a ton of stuff. So, I mean, you could really go down the rabbit hole. If anyone is looking to pivot a little bit in their careers, your backgrounds already position you very well. If you wanted to pivot and become a privacy engineer, we desperately need them. And especially someone like Zach Edwards is amazing. He's an adversarial privacy engineer, and he blogs incessantly about these things. So he shares it all with the world, because you can really keep us honest, in terms of what's actually happening with the tech. It's not to say people like me who are lawyers can't go part of the way. I can go part of the way, but I'm not down there into the code with the developers. And then the last thing I want to just pitch, I'm not directly affiliated with them, I just love them. The Rise of Privacy Tech has an unconference coming up on September 28th. An unconference is you get together and people pitch that they're going to host a conversation. So you're going to get a lot of people there talking about, how to design tech better, ethical uses of data and stuff. And I'm hoping to propose something there on how do we keep PrivTech honest. So we've got some bad actors, as we saw with the journalists, who are being targeted by people abusing their privacy, but then protecting their own using Proton Mail. So we've got to find a way to stop PrivTech from being disrupted and abused and weaponized by people who will not respect other people's privacy. So that's one of the, whether we talk about that at an upcoming My Data community meeting in October 6th, tentatively scheduled. I'm hoping it's a conversation I want to get into with the privacy community as well. So next slide. What does that mean for you competitively? Because ultimately people are going to say, your businesses are going to say, well, okay, that's all fine and good, but everybody else is doing it, and now we're not going to have the data. Getting privacy right, next slide, sorry, is really good for business. It's good for your business if you're planning on making it attractive to investors. It's good for your business if you want to make sure you understand what's happening with your data. And importantly, and now more than ever, the privacy active segment, which happens to be a cohort or a segment of the population that also has money to spend, and is if you can get their loyalty now, they're going to be your customers for a really long time. Now, post-pandemic, if we can say post and post-Roe, people now more than ever are taking very seriously how their data is being treated. And if they don't trust how their data is being used, they will make decisions. We've seen all these apps being deleted. We've seen people acting with their clicks and with their downloads or with their deletions, that they are taking their privacy very seriously in a post-Roe world. So that's the end. Thank you for indulging me in going well over time. We're on the last slide is how you can get in touch. I've got my Twitter handle and my LinkedIn profile on there. I'm a geek. I love to speak, write, train on this. I recently wrote an article that's going to be coming out in Privacy Laws in Business, but it's behind a paywall. But I've written on privacy preserving digital advertising or marketing and stuff, and I can share that also with Garth if he wants to share those around. I can share some of my old articles if that's of interest. So
yes, share that. I guess with talking about rabbit holes is curation, because everybody's busy, everybody's time is limited. I know a number of our members, they have families, and so I'm wondering if that's something that we can talk about and share later. Is what curation is out there? Is there paths that have been followed and help, or maybe it's your experience or specific links, or what My Data Canada might have established for paths.
And what do you mean by paths?
It's just curation in that there is a lot of material.
Yeah.
And so here's a path for a gentle, less mind-numbing introduction, and here's a series of top 10 things, and then a top 10, the next 10, and the next 10, and it's sort of slicing it up into consumable things, because we could browse for hours, and we if it's being curated to some extent, that means somebody with experience has put value on something versus something else, so time is better focused.
Yeah, well, they're definitely so from a personal, like when you're trying to protect your own privacy, that slide that I showed you that had the security let me see if I can tell you exactly which slide it is. If we go back, I had this slide that was right after what can I do about it? The make a plan slide. You could choose any one, just any one of these. I would say maybe use the security planner as a starting point.
Which number was it?
So that is slide number, I don't have the numbers on here, but if you go, just keep going back a bit. Yeah, I know you're too far back, forward. And again. And keep going. Okay, there. That's it. Yeah.
Now will it go there?
It's the make a plan slide, but I've got a few different things. You could pick any one of those. The one in the far, the bottom right corner there is the, oh, there we go. Okay, so make a plan is.
It's not gonna do that for me.
Okay, no problem.
Wait a minute. I think maybe I found it. I'm not familiar with this there it is. Make a plan. There we go.
So I think an easy place to start, and this is what I actually did with one of my children. Actually, I said, let's go through this and let's answer the questions together, and it was really handy. We were able to do it. We took part of the day on a Saturday and did a few of those things. Because what it tries to do is it tries to help you prioritize. So we're not going to address everything, but we nail those top things. Right. The VPN is really important. The private website, private search, and just deleting all those unnecessary apps. There's a lot of junk. Like there are a lot of apps that we have, and they're just constantly taking data in. So just deleting a lot of that stuff. You can do a lot even just with those 5 things. From a privacy engineering standpoint. Again, in terms of how to start, I actually think the OWASP Privacy Top 10 is a really good place to start.
Right.
Because they've already broken it down into a top 10. Then the Blue Book is very easy to read in terms of how it's set up. As for curating privacy tools. So I kind of threw a bunch at you on these slides, but there are, maybe I'll try and include the links. There is one called privacytools.io, I think is the name of it. And they've curated it quite nicely. So that's also helpful. I think
So the privacy design, is that when you say blue book, is that the privacy design strategies?
That's got strategies, yeah. So it's called the Privacy Blue Book, and I will link to it in the slides after.
Okay.
Yeah, so privacytools.io. I can put that in the chat right now. I really like that one. It is quite nicely curated, and it goes across different categories. I mean, a lot of, like, there's so many. You're right, it is easy to go down the rabbit hole. So I think you just need to pick one. So what I would say is make a plan with you using one of these things on the slide. So just pick one and stick with that. And then when you're trying to decide, if it says get a VPN and you're trying to decide which VPN, you can look, for example, at privacytools.io, and they've got a whole list of, they've got it categorized by privacy email, privacy VPN, private browser, password managers, cloud storage, so on.
Right. VPN choice is important to be concerned about, because some unnamed VPNs have this annoying capability of streaming all their traffic through an endpoint in a surveillance country. So choice of
you can say unnamed. I'm happy to name them.
Right. Well, let's just say it's somehow related to the Chinese Communist Party.
Okay. So there's another one. So you're right, with VPNs you have to be very careful. So Yandex is sort of the Russian Google, and it is owned by, so it's Russian owned. They have an app analytics offering called Appmetrica. And shortly after Russia's invasion, suddenly Appmetrica was found in a lot of different apps. And again, this was Zach Edwards who found this. It was directing traffic. It was even in some VPNs. I think there were like 10 different VPNs that it was in. It was directing traffic to Russia, and so it was even included in some VPNs that were targeting Ukrainian users. So you don't want a VPN that's blabbing about you, or like you said, just not being very careful with your data. So the VPN one, it is important to choose well. So in terms of curation, I find privacytools.io is a really good starting point, because they've done these reviews. Mozilla also does regular reviews of different things. So they'll do things on VPNs. The Privacy Not Included is a really helpful one to read as well. So they've got top 5. NordVPN is often up there as one of the first ones. And they've got links to guides. So I really like privacytools.io as a resource.
We've shared the link in the chats for Privacy Tools. So, and we'll be sharing your slide deck in the description of this presentation, in our Slack, on our Twitter, yada, yada, yada. So we'll look forward to the updated version of that. We're at 92 minutes. So yeah. I will let everybody go. This has been really, really important. And I'm really happy that you've had the opportunity to be able to share your knowledge with us. And I look forward to working with My Data Canada in the future, in more collaboration. So hang about, but for the moment, we'll end the broadcast and look forward to our super secret stealth meetup that may occur in real life, and potentially, and then eventually our October meetup. So until then, stay private and stay safe.